All right, so with that, I will announce the motion for the grand finals. The time now is 6:02. The debate will start at 6:32. The motion for grand final reads, this House prefers political outrage as a norm over political civility. I would like to welcome the Prime Minister to start the debate. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. So our time will begin in 3, 2, 1. We think that the opposition side ruled when war occurs, their decision is to do this. They are going to kindly ask the opponent, hey, can you please get out of our country? No, we don't think this is an effective form of trying to get their opponent out of our country. And that is why we propose this motion. This thus refers political outrage as a norm over political civility. So before we go on to our team's first and second argument, which is firstly about effective engage, and secondly how we protect and represent minorities better than the other side in this debate, let's firstly set up this debate. So context, how does the current society look like? We currently see our society as where minorities aren't represented properly. In addition to that, laws aren't changing properly in the first place. And even if laws are trying to change, we believe that the process of changing law right now is extremely slow. And because the politicians do not really know the urgency of the current status quo or etc. Number two, the main stakeholders of this debate will be the minorities, government, and the people in society. And lastly, to solve this issue, which is basically our mechanization on how this actually works, how our side will look like is, well, on our side, since on our side, political outrage is a dominant norm over political civility. We believe that on our side, people will view political outrage as a much more better form of actually effectively changing in society. Therefore, when they are trying to make their strategies or trying to protest outside and trying to make change in society, they will usually use political outrage in order to change the government, in order to convince the government later on. And that is why we believe that we will be able to achieve change in the first place. And that is why let's move on to our team's first and second argument on how we are effective in change, and second about how we protect and represent minorities better than the other side in this debate. Number one argument about how we are effective in change. Before we go on to the real reason why we are effective in change, let's prove the urgency of changing in society. The reason why we believe that it's urgent to change issues in society is, for example, let's take an example of minorities and people out there like LGBTQ, or maybe like the people in the minorities in the current status quo. We believe that the reason why this is urgent is because currently a lot of people in society have fixed minds and fixed beliefs. For example, some people out there have stereotypes of, for example, like people may have sort of stereotypes about women should do these things or etc., or they might believe LGBTQ as a bad person or etc. In addition to that, because of these stereotypes and beliefs in society and all those political disadvantages that minorities and people receive in society, due to that, sometimes in job applications they deserve a disadvantage and they have a high probability of being rejected or etc. In addition to that, for example, historically we have seen a lot of slavery out there, and to solve these issues, we believe that political outrage is the answer. We're going to prove that in our team's first analysis about how logically thinking we believe that it is effective to change when we use political outrage. Why is that so? So the reason why we believe that using political outrage is the most effective form of actually changing society is because, number one, if you are aggressive, if you are trying to show the society, or you're trying to show rage and you're trying to be outraged, we believe that when you're outraged, media attention will increase. Why is that so? It's because media attention is usually profit bias. They like to show the most no thank you. So they will usually show us the most aggressive or show us the most fearful news possible. And therefore, if movements are aggressive and movements are trying to show their outrage part of their life, we believe that the media attention will gradually increase. Therefore, since the governments and government officials and the Congress of that certain government will view the news, there will naturally be an increase in government interest into this movement in the first place. And number two, we believe that aggression in society in itself can create attention in society. Why is this so? It's because aggression in itself can create problems in society. No, thank you. And the reason why this is effective is because since it's creating these problems, and since the government's job and the duty is actually help save the income, save the society in the first place, we believe that the government's attention will naturally increase because it's moving and creating problems in the first place. And since the government's duty is actually to solve these issues in the first place, and the second analysis why we are effective in change is because of historical. It's because of history. Number one, let's take an example of Japan taking over Korea as a whole. So when Japan took over Korea, we did not peacefully solve this issue. We are outraged. We showed rage in society. We need this change. You are incorrect, Japan. Get out of our country. We were extremely outrageous. That changed society. Now Korea is free, and we effectively solved the issue. Number two, our apartheid, where there was this policy in Africa where white people are more prioritized in Africa, or etc. At that example, we have seen outrageous people protesting in Africa that we need change. White people shouldn't be prioritized. We are also a member society. This changed the society in Africa. Last example about how, for example, the Roe v. Wade about abortion rights. In this case, people use aggression, and people use a lot of aggressive protests to actually make change in society. Therefore, historically speaking, we believe that political outrage is actually the most historically and logically the best and the most effective form of actually solving society. Therefore, we believe that on our side, we will be able to effectively make change in society in the first place. And number two, in addition to that, if we compare our vote to the other side in this debate, because on our side we are outrageous, we'll be able to make this effectiveness and compare effectiveness. While on the other side, since they're just peacefully asking the society, the government, hey, can you please change this? Since they are peacefully asking the government to change a certain issue, governments can easily view this as not a big issue because they aren't outrageous. In addition to that, because these people are actually showing extreme activeness into I want to change this because they are not showing their aggression. Therefore, we believe that on our side, we will be much more effective in trying to make change in society. Last argument of this debate, why we protect and represent minorities better than the other side. The main reason why we believe that we will be better at representing minorities, because since on our side, the reason why minorities are important is because number one, they are a part of society. Number two, they're getting the most disadvantages. They're getting the most less amount of credit in society. Therefore, since on our side, we make this by using the norm of political outrage, you'll be able to make these minorities go out there and shout out, we need this change in society, we need the law to change, we need this to change society in the first place. For example, let's take the example of BLM. After BLM happened, in terms of education and entertainment, a lot have changed. For example, in education, schools started to change their policies and rules to stop make people bullying these black people, and also give education to the students that you should not bully these minorities in the first place. And number two, we can also talk about entertainment, how they promote Black Lives Matter. For example, the NBA, they have these Black Lives Matter things on their t-shirts. This shows the effectiveness of how being aggressive, you'll be able to represent minorities like George Floyd or etc. Therefore, we believe that on our side, we have these benefits. That is why we take this debate home. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Prime Minister, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Leader of Opposition to start the opposition case here.
Hi, I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Great. Just a moment over here. Visual POIs, by the way, and just one question for proposition: which camera should I look for POI? Is that camera 2?
Yeah, I think it's camera 2.
All right, that's amazing. He and pronouns, everything clarified. Visual POIs. Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. It's weird that proposition hinges their entire case on the fact that they have and get change with outrage political discussion. However, we tell you the potency of political outrage dissipates when it is changed to change the stratas of societal norms. Under this, ambition civilly forwards you a 2-point case. Number one on the fact that why political civility is better than political outrage, and number 2 on the fact that why this norm is problematic. But before that, a few points of setup and refutation to the first Prime Minister speaker. Number 1, let's set up our stance and burden. We go against propositions in a world where political outrage is a norm, as well as political outrage in the many instances that happens in status quo. In the many instances, not all instances, let me make this very clear. So, insofar as we're able to prove why proposition in the world is not one to be preferred, we're able to take this debate home. But one extra point of clarification to this burden is that we do not have the burden to prove how we prefer political civility as a norm. This largely mitigates propositions, at least half of proposition's speech, but also that's why we don't tell the invader to please stop, but instead, when all discussion pertains itself to this degree of outrage, we say that's the problem. We say that's when change won't happen. We say that's when the invasion happens, that's when we cause a net harm. That is the problem of proposition. Then this brings us straight into our refutation on change. So the proposition's first speaker dedicated 6 minutes to just why they have change and why that change is good, because why that change is good talking about a myriad of impacts to the minorities, etc., etc. We tell you that instead change stagnates, and that proposition does not have change, which I'll prove through my argument. But before that, let me tell you one thing. Outrage has zero emotional impact when it is a norm. We get all your analysis on change on our side and only on our side, which will also prove our argument. And one extra point to refute this point about minorities that keep on coming out through propositions for speech is that not all political discussions are minorities. They don't just pertain to minorities, invasions, wars. Political discussion can just pertain to me and Alex, me and my second speaker talking about the election that is to come in the next presidential campaign. That is the nature of a political discussion. It's the fact that you're doing discourse, you're having discourse on a political topic. We tell you that to this definition, there's a specific purpose that the opposition side uniquely adheres to, that which proposition fails to do, which brings us fluently into our first argument on why political civility is better than political outrage. So, to answer this question I've made before, and to answer the purpose that is under political discussion. What is the purpose of political discussion? It's to advance society and individuals through expression of perspectives and constructive, logical exchange of ideas. So, how does political outrage not adhere to this purpose, as I've emphasized to and bolstered to throughout this entire speech? It's because the premise to political outrage is the fact that you're angry, and oftentimes you're angry means that you're oftentimes angry and irrational. The fact is that when you're angry, is that fact that your emotions drive your ideas. You don't restrain yourself. You are angry, you are outraged. That is the wording, that is the rhetoric of the exact term of political outrage. We say there are three structural problems under this, because when you don't restrain yourself, when political outrage only adheres to the human condition of anger and the human emotion of anger that follows anger. Number one, means that you're more likely to attack the opposing persons rather than opposing persons to your stance. Rather than attacking the person's logic and actual stance and case, it means that you attack the person's specific traits, notwithstanding person's actual case, notwithstanding their logic. This is what happens when you're angry, when you're acting irrational, when you're just going against with outrage. Then our second structural problem, how it's less likely to hear others, and vice versa. Others don't want to hear you, regardless of whether you're logical or you're not. This is problematic because when you don't view the perspective, you view the other perspective, you can't grow society, and you can't grow your opinions. And you can't grow your opinions, you can't grow your unique stance and your opponent's unique stance. You can't grow as a society. The fact is on why this others don't want to hear you, regardless of your logical framing, of your logical speech, stance, rhetoric. It's the fact that when it is a norm, it becomes regular. That means however much you just yell, however much you're angry, however much you express your outrage to the situation, it becomes increasingly normalized. It's like hearing a tantrum all over again. It's everywhere on all political discussions. It pervades to every single political discussion. That is the norm. Of course, it's not every, but it pervades to most. Therefore, it leads to a large mitigation of emotional impacts. And oftentimes with political outrage, your opinions become, and this is the third structural reason, is that your opinions become stigmatized. On the comparative, why civility is better is because number one mainly, is the fact that there's logical extrainment without this convoluted sense of logic that comes and follows and hears in logic and anger and irrationality. So then let's quickly move on to our argument two. Why is this norm problematic? The premise is that when something is a norm, it's coercive and normalized. Three structural reasons why this is problematic. Number one, people who would otherwise engage in political civility won't do so because it's a norm. It's coercive and it's normalized. And we've laid out the problems with this on our first argument. Number two, there's a loss of choice. It doesn't matter if you want to be angry or civil. Everyone equally gravitates to the stance of the norm. We say that's a loss of choice. That's infringement on the individual's rights. Number three, and finally, is the fact that there are certain benefits to political outrage. We don't deny this. It's the fact that it creates emotion, but there's no emotion when it is a norm. We've bolstered this point to you throughout our opening line and throughout our entire case with our proposition speech. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Deputy Prime Minister to continue the government case. Hear, hear.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Yup. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, opposition deserves to lose the debate when the leader of opposition clearly told you we don't want political stability as a norm. If there is a wrong thing, you just say that is a problematic thing we need to solve. Judge, that's not the purpose of this debate. Judge, that's not the debate motion. What this debate motion means is literally it's about comparing, is political outrage a better thing for society as a norm, or is political stability right thing for or better for society as a norm? This is what the debate is about, Judge. It's about comparing who is much more better for various stakeholders. We tell you what is the purpose of debate. They don't understand why are we even debating this if we're just gonna say, we're just gonna agree in the problem. Because all of their impacts are saying only will exist when they say we want political stability. But if they don't want this as a norm, I still don't know what their role is going to even look like, Judge. I don't know what their benefits of their role exclusively have. We told you we have exclusive benefits, they have exclusive harms. We have already proved this. Let's elaborate this more. But I still don't have their rules. If the next speaker just comes up to this debate and say, but this isn't just like the normal, we still have it. That is nonsense, Judge. That can't be happen. If their impact should be so huge as they want to show us, they should at least frame their role, what thing even looks like. We framed what our role looks like is for the problematic reason. For example, Korea independent, the reason why Korea could have been independent from Japan was because they outraged, was because they show aggressive. You think that Japan will seriously just go out on Korea if Korea is saying, please, Japan, can you just go after a country? We don't want this, we don't like, we actually like independence. No, that's not gonna happen. Just apartheid could have been destroyed because Black people are literally showing aggressiveness to the white people. This is the wrong thing, right? Do you think that Black people could have erased apartheid by saying, white people, we don't like for you to actually getting blamed and becoming like slavery for you, so please go out. That's not gonna happen, Judge. That doesn't never feel for the stakeholders, for the other side to say like, oh, eventually this isn't an urgent issue. We tell this is inefficient with logical issues. Outrage itself has much more media coverage. Outrage itself shows you that eventually it is an urgent situation. It gets issued, right? We tell you that is the logic in today's debate. Their first argument was about how outrage, because this itself is a human emotion, it's very hard to restrain. So eventually you cannot be logical. And it's actually bad because you can't grow society as a together, right? For the point that's saying that they're not logic, we think this is not an exclusive point. Because Judge, look what the world is going to look like. There's going to still be people that are unlogical, right? In the other team world, what they're saying is like they're just kindly saying weird things. In our team, we're saying like we're angrily saying weird things. But the problem is if you talk about weird things, media always covers it, right? There is natural check and balance existing. We tell you if you have just weird logic, whatever you express, that's just gonna literally be ignored and get criticized, right? We tell you that is the reality. However, Judge, what the issue and to this debate and what shouldn't be compared is that even though you prove the logic, what is more efficient when you show actually your side and your arguments? Because we told you that even though minorities have the right logic of why minorities should have a much more should have same rights and much have a better life, they don't listen, right? The reason why they listen, Judge, is because they don't know how much this is an urgent point. And we told you if you want to show this, how much this is an urgent point, how much this is a wrong thing, it is aggressiveness. Psychologically, humans feel that this is an issue thing. If you feel like we think that this is definitely wrong. In the argument, they're saying, please, because I think this is definitely wrong. That's not gonna solve it, right? That's not proving any urgency for the other side, right? We tell you that is the thing. Also about growing together in society, we tell you there's something definitely wrong. You shouldn't like propose with that side, right? That's the wrong thing, Judge. If you think that there is a bad thing, you should seriously tell you that that's bad. Literally, Judge, like slavery or LGBTQ rights or even Korea's independence. You don't want Japan and Korea when Japan was literally invading Korea to like grow in a society together, right, Judge? They still, in their society, Korea isn't still independent. They still have slavery. They still have apartheid. That is what the other team world looks like, Judge. And even though in the first place, they even don't frame their own world, because I don't know in the first place, but still, we have won this rebuttal. But moreover, for second rebuttal about normalize, how if this becomes a norm, but it's so likely going to be normalized. First of all, we tell that eventually it's still going to be issue, because eventually aggression itself shows you how this is much more issue way, but even though it's a normalized thing, I don't know why this is different from the other thing, because this is literally about, is this norm better or is this norm better, right? We tell that aggression itself psychologically, it still makes you feel for the other side to at least listen, because there's literally showing aggressiveness and all the anger to the other side, right? We tell you that is the case. But moreover, because they never prove what their own world is going to look like, I still don't think it's I still don't think how this is going to help their case. But moreover, because they literally said they don't want political stability as a norm, they deserve to lose, right? So they also talked about how this, like, for example, well, because we already told you about helping all minorities, they still have slavery, they still have apartheid. They talked about not all things are about minorities. It's also about presidential election, right? We tell minorities are much more important, because the problem with status quo is even though you say the same logic, people don't listen. And we tell it's going to be much more worse in the other teams, because they're saying the logic in a much more kindly way. We can do this together. Can you please listen to us? No one's going to listen, because no one thinks that is a big issue, right? Psychologically, if someone is much more aggressive, this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing, we need that. That is has proven to literally have become an issue. And history proves you that eventually that is the way we can have changed the world. We want change in the world, Judge. They want to have eventually bad side. Let's become together, and eventually the bad side will listen to us. That's not happening. That has shown you in history. Moreover, we tell you if it's actually much more aggressive, if the other team side is eventually going to be much more kindly, it's actually easier to suppress that individual, right? Because eventually, if they want to talk about this presidential election, it's going to be much more easier to suppress that, because you're just kindly talking about this, right? And therefore, because all sides have their own side and they want to win, and eventually that is what the likely scenario is going to happen. So I don't think like becoming all kind will likely going to happen. Josh, before I end my speech, I'd like to give a burden to on time. Please engage into this. Don't you guys have slavery? For all these reasons, I'm very proud to host.
All right, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the opposition case. Hear, hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll prefer he, him pronouns like I clarified, and if I'm visible and audible, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. The potency of political outrage dissipates when it is chained to the stratus of societal norms. This is a fundamental claim that we forward you in Ethan's speech that gets zero response and very poor lack of engagement down opposition's bench. I want to talk about 3 things in this speech and provide to you why we win this round. Number 1, on why minorities cannot create change, and we flip this point on our side. Secondly, why we don't have the burden to defend why the norm of political civility will look like be the world in which we need to defend. But finally, and most importantly, why logical discussions, even if we need to defend the norm of political civility, is still better. So firstly, proposition in this debate hinges most of their argumentation on minorities creating change. This is the main thing in which they attempt to analyze within our debate. But firstly, discussions and protests are very different. These protests oftentimes exaggerate the harms of certain types of narratives, oftentimes use anger and political outrage to gather people emotionally. So there's a different purpose between protests and discussions. Comparatively, discussions should not rely on emotions and rather on logic and structuring arguments as to why an opposing narrative is not true. That's why we also tell you anger oftentimes ruins the discussion, because structurally people are more irrational. People are more angry, meaning that they're more likely to attack the other person or individual and not necessarily the idea that the individual is proposing. But the second structural reason why they don't create change is because oftentimes logical discussions on our side encourage protest and demand for change as well. Because if there's logical reasons as to why, or like structural reasons that have been delivered logically to prove why Black people in our society are being harmed, when there are structural facts that support or analytical reasons as to why Black people and women are suffering in our status quo, this creates a demand for change within media or within discussions. Thirdly, minorities on their side will be stigmatized as radical. This is an important point that Ethan forwards that doesn't get sufficient response. If minorities are shouting and not constraining themselves, there are two reasons why they're going to be framed as radical. Number one, it's easier for oppressors to use this anger against the minorities. But secondly, if there are few people that represent the minorities in this discussion that's angry, the whole cause, the whole message, and the purpose of the movement is also framed as an angry mob of people not having a justifiable reason for their anger. We point to examples such as BLM No Thank You, where less people listened and more people stigmatized the movements for being angry, for destroying innocent people's house, being radical, rather than actually engaging in the logical reasons as to why Black people are stigmatized. The fourth reason here is because when angry or irrational, language of these people, rhetoric of these people becomes problematic and irrational. They oftentimes might swear, they often might use words that are offensive. That means this is problematic because media and oppressors focus on the language, focus on the angry rhetoric of these individuals, criticize them for these rhetoric and language and swearing possibly, not necessarily focusing on the actual message of the movement, the message of the arguments in the first place. Like they concede, media has limited attention capital. So if more people are focusing on how angry the minorities were in the discussion the other day, instead of what these people were advocating for in the first place, which come through logical arguments on our side, we tell you that's problematic. Fifth reason why this is untrue. When political outrage is the norm, Ethan already points out to you, it's normalized, so less people are moved from the emotion. The benefit that they outline of political outrage is that it brings emotion and it brings an urgency. That emotion is only effective when that emotion is used occasionally, not necessarily when it's used every other day in a discussion. That is why we tell you they won't receive full attention. The sixth reason why, though, is comparatively, why is our side better in protecting minorities and creating change? In discussions, if minorities logically explain the harms in discussions, not movements, and show respect to the opposing ideas, firstly, more people are likely to listen, and Ethan already points out, which gets zero rebuttal, but secondly, it shows minorities are capable of listening. It shows minorities are capable of proper discussion, which breaks existing stereotypes that minorities are oftentimes angry mobs of people, and oppressors, again, use that. That in and of itself is a benefit because we protect the people we ought to protect. Seventhly reason and final reason this is untrue, because comparatively we grant choice. Firstly, if minority groups think that the possible benefits of political outrage outweighs the benefits mentioned in Ethan's speech, most likely they have the choice on our side to do this. But on their side, when political outrage is a norm, we tell you that movements are stigmatized, are not able to freely choose to engage in political civility, because most people, and it's expected that these movements and discussions focus on political outrage in the first place. Before I move on to reframing this debate, I'll take a point if there is any.
Did slavery end because of political civility?
Yeah, this is a really funny point. They constantly talk about slavery, and I'll deal with this in this point about reframing this debate. Proposition in this debate thinks that our world is very black and white. They think a specific issue is only solved because of one thing or another, so only because of political outrage and political civility. The examples that they bring, such as war, is not a normal situation. There needs to be a balance of political civility, but also political outrage. We tell you on our side, there's more likely that that balance is met because there's no norm enforcing certain type of behavior in discussions. But secondly, it's also better in war when people are politically civil. Within governments and within countries, if there's discussions to discuss how they should react internationally to war, it's better if there's logical analysis of certain weapons they can use, certain types of problems that they need to address. But secondly, they talk about Korea's independence. Korea's independence was also solved not because of political outrage, but also because people were discussing and people made logical arguments as to how comfort women have been oppressed for far too long. They made logical reasons as to why Dokdo belongs to Korea, not Japan. And these are ways in which people advocated for the movement in the first place. They can't tell you, and there's no way to objectively quantify why political outrage has done more in contributing to Korea's independence and war situation than political civility. So the example that they hang and hinge their case on doesn't stand. If you want change, if you actually want proper discussions and not a hurtful discussion filled with hurtful meaning, we tell you we need to oppose this motion.
All right, thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Government Whip. Here.
Can everybody hear me loud and clear?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Judge, we say that slavery didn't end because of logic. We say that it's because thousands of people actually came up and said that they want help. They want it to end, right? We say that because they want to be because they want independence. It's because they want a choice to be actually a human, right? Which is why we're proud to propose. Thank you. Judge, we have 2 clashes for you today. First, it's going to be about which side, which road has exclusive is more effective and productive. Second class is going to be about which road has exclusive benefits and harm. And I would like to extend all my rebuttals into my clashes. First clash is going to be about which side is more effective versus productive. So what did the proposition tell you in the first place? We first of all told you about media attention, right? We told you how we get media because media's incentive is to get views and people like aggressive things. We told you about the status quo, about BLM and whatnot, right? So we also told you about a politician's incentive, how they want media's attention because they want votes, right? So what's the effect of this? We get more people's attention, first of all, in a lot of issues. Second of all, we get more young people's attention as well. So they're more likely to vote because they actually know what the problem is in the first place, right? And fourth of all, other politicians also want media attention, so they're more likely to do the same thing, right? So what did the opposition say? They had like this whole one-liner about how protests depend on emotion, not logic. First of all, told you that political outrage also has logic, right? We told you that it's we told you that from the very get-go of the debate. Second of all, then what's your side, right? Because the problem with the opposition is that the opposition doesn't have a case in the first place, right? They said that it's not their burden to like prove that political civility is the choice of their choice and it's better. Now what's your side? Do they not know what this as prefers motion is? Their side has to prove why political civility is better than political outrage, right? Okay, so first of all, even if like protests like depend on emotion, individual that's like individual level, that's not exclusive in the first place, right? Second of all, why is it bad, right? They never proved mechanism, right? They never proved why it's actually bad that we kind of like depend on like emotion and not logic, right? To be persuasive in the first place, you kind of you need emotion in the first place, right? Third of all, we say that we're gonna actually get more attention and media, which is the benefit in today's debate, right? B, we also told you what happens during war, right? We on the opposition side did nothing to do this, right? We also gave examples of slavery, which the opposition didn't talk about in the first place. We told you how we have people showing what they want by more by being aggressive, right? You see that that's the only way we actually get the benefits, get the effects that we actually want, right? No engagement to that. Thirdly, we told you about minorities, right? We told you in the status quo, minorities are scared to speak up, right? We told you if there's a lot of politicians or at least like one politician who's like being aggressive for them, they feel accepted, they feel like they're getting valued as like an individual, right? And they were like the opposition only had this point about like we don't have change because like if it's a norm, it's not going to change. We still see that we're going to get more attention, right? And this debate is about a norm in the first place. How are you going to get attention for minorities in the first place as well, right? You never proved that, right? Opposition said that it's not the burden, right? How is it not the burden? The team doesn't even know the motion, which is why they should lose the debate in the first place, right? Although they didn't even come up here and give us a case, which we were very surprised about, right? Second, they talked about anger, right? They talked about how attack impulse person, right? And how it's not like It's not like the log, they don't use their logic, right? But first of all, we say that we already told you in the first place, right? Second of all, we told you that a lot like anger is needed in the first place to actually make an impact, which is the most important thing that the opposition missed in the first place, right? They talked about normalized, right? How we don't have any emotion. First of all, that's very contradictory, right? Because their whole case about we don't have like anger, right? And then second, they just come up here and be like, oh, you guys don't have any emotion because it's normalized and it's the norm, right? Contradiction, like to the anger point, right? Second of all, we at least have a role. What did the opposition have? Not a role, right? 0 versus at least 1. We should see that we get the vote, right? Okay, so also aggression also causes utility, right? That's important. But reason for us voting is because like we want change for the better, right? By doing, we proved why we have the minority stakeholders, and simple, we don't have slavery in the first place, right? Conclusion. First, we proved how they act. They actually have the burden to wrong, but like it's too late, right? Second, we proved how they their points contradict their case. Third, about they never engaged to war, right? The second clash is talking about which role Australia have exclusive benefits and harm, right? The proposition came up here and said that we have like minorities and like we actually help them, right? But like like we already talked about this, so I'm gonna like kind of like use the best case worst case, right? The opposition came up here and be like more people stigmatized because of the movement, right? But first of all, why is that bad, right? Second of all, how do you get the attention if you don't have like people being aggressive in the first place, right? Also, like they said that message is going to be destroyed. Well, results are more important, right? We say that slavery didn't become like that become soft because like we begged them in their knees and like we were like, please like change the social status, right? We gave them impact, right? We gave them like the results, which is more important in the first place, right? We say that the opposition didn't even have a case in the first place, which is why we actually have exclusive benefits. And the opposition have to prove what their case is in the first place. They have to show how like logic like emotion is not needed in the needed to actually persuade someone in the first place, which is why you're about to propose.
All right, thank you, Government Whip, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Opposition Whip. Here.
Am I audible? Am I audible? Opposition? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're audible.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want to make 3 things clear in my speech. Firstly, our burden is never to defend political stability as norm, but to oppose why political outrage as a norm and prove why it is harmful. But secondly, we believe that political stability as a norm is much more better in terms of utilizing these anger. Because the point that side proposition never responds is that anger emotions is better utilized when it's much more rare and it can be used in much more severe situation. And people have significant degree of adaptation that I'm going to further analyze in my classes. Thirdly, Judge, it is not a debate about social changes, but about the clear and effective communication and discussion that exists in current society. I mean, this side proposition needs to shift their burden, but also their focus and priority rather on discussions rather than on social change. Because social change and these discussions are purpose of genuinely different. We tell you that these discussions primarily focus on effective communication, such as logic and coherences, the point the side proposition never engages on. 2 things in my speech. First of all, prove why anger is effective mechanism, and secondly, prove why which side is able to create much more effective change, and prove ultimately why these major 2 clashes stand on side opposition. Firstly, the debate, first clash about whether anger is effective. Judge, firstly, from the opposition first speaker, we told from the beginning that anger has human have a degree of adaptation. You simply get used to things when you're exposed to that things a lot. E.g., even though when a person get like said a swear comment here, and you get constantly exposed to it, you feel less pain, less attention, and less like fear to it. And we did that same in the case of side proposition. It is because media first can get attention to anger, but eventually it will fade out. And that's the point the side proposition never engages on. But even when we take the best case aside proposition, we still take the debate home. Because the actual problem is this: society can lose political capital when describing severe and urgent issues, such as minority aside proposition ones, that actually needs attention and anger, right? Because now in current society, people cannot distinguish what is important or not, because every important issues are described as in same degree, right? And therefore, that's the margin the side proposition actually needs to engage on, right? Because there's two major impacts, because firstly, they're going to be less effective political change, but secondly, it severely mitigates the point of political change that side proposition ultimately approves on. But note that side proposition, the impact of this was much more severe when recognizing that all policy and all social change requires significant amounts of political capital. Oftentimes, when you create a political change, you're going against the social norm. When you're not able to have lots of attention towards it, that is when you're not able to change for the minority. That is when these racial minorities still exist in current society and still suffer. And that's the word that side proposition actually exists on. I want to move on to my next point secondly, about people have a natural sense of self-protection. All anger is always directed towards a certain actor or a cause, because people do not want to be wrong or criticized and likely going to react back. And Josh, this is important because anger is not one-sided, but is the matter of interaction. Rather than focus on irrational anger, they lose time and political capital in terms to actually leverage the current problem because of the anger. But thirdly, we need to note that emotions and anger connect how you perceive things as well. If you're angry, you're likely going to receive things or view things as negative, meaning that the problem that minority discussion are likely going to view in much more negative terms, meaning that the social change of proposition cannot exist. But let's move on to my second clash about which side is much more effective in terms of current society. I want to clarify one thing, because ultimately side proposition concedes to the fact that norms are coercive in nature, right? Because norms are coercive, it actually impacts lots of people. The only response that side proposition gives you is that they're able to gain more attention to media. No response about the arguments or actually refutation the second speaker gives you. Because just two responses. Because firstly, media focusing more on the language itself. E.g., such as like election between Biden and Trump. The media most likely focus on the wording as Trump, wording of the Biden. And secondly, because there aren't lots of context they could actually drive from in terms of news. Because note that these angers and actual context or reciprocal relationship, they cannot coexist together. And just note that side proposition never prove why they can focus on logic and anger at the same time. Because logic and anger are different in nature, and people have limited attention, and capital. And therefore, since attention is limited capital, they need to prove why people have sufficient amount of attention to focus on both problems. But thirdly, we want to point out an important point in this debate that second speaker already mentioned to you, because about lacking participation in political discussion. If I just prove that why side proposition lacking political participation, most of their benefit about social change does not exist. Not all people share the same degree of anger, aggression. And just this is crucial because people all have different perspectives in viewing a certain issue. Because norms are coercive in nature, it forces most of the political discussion to be driven by anger, driven by aggression, right? But note that since not all people share the same degree of anger and aggression, some people cannot participate within the movement. Then who are the people who cannot participate? These are the people who are oftentimes moderates, who can actually judge what is right or wrong. Moderates are the ones who actually is much more important because they are the ones who actually can create political change. Even if we take the best case side proposition and assume that anger is effective, we need to know that people still have to fake themselves. Fake anger that they themselves do not contain, meaning that the authenticity of the political discussion oftentimes can be misrepresented by the media, and therefore that it all causes a wrongful change, a radicalization that side proposition ultimately mentioned to explain. Thirdly, we just want to briefly talk about moderates are generally important, and fake anger and fake discussions are ultimately harmful in terms of creating social change. Then, Judge, we need to note that the potency of political outrage dissipates when it's changed the practice of societal norms. That is why side opposition is more than proud to oppose.
Right, thank you, Opposition Rep, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Opposition Reply to close the opposition's case. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Anger moves people, but constant anger doesn't. This is the fundamental claim again, and I hate to use this line again, that we forward to you down our bench that gets lack of engagement down propositions. I'm going to talk about two things in this speech. Number one, I want to talk about the two strategic points that defines why we take this debate, which is firstly, our burden was never to prove why on our side we need to support political civility as a norm. But secondly, we were quite nice, right? We gave you an even if analysis on two structural levels about why even if political civility is the norm, about why this is still harmful. And secondly, even if this political outrage and how utilizing anger doesn't exist on their case, why we still take this debate. So firstly, why isn't it our burden to prove why on our side we need to support political civility as a norm? Because they never proved to you any likelihood analysis as to why political civility is likely to be the overriding norm on our side. They merely assert this and they enforce this burden onto us constantly. Then secondly, why is it true, even if political civility is the norm on our side and political outrage is the norm on their side, why we still take this debate? Because we tell you down our bench that even if political civility is the norm, political outrage and emotion on our side is better utilized because people aren't constantly shouting. They only shout when they want to emphasize a message or want to deliver a certain type of change. If everyone is shouting daily and during discussions, this doesn't create change because people and media get used to this anger in the first place. Zero response, and it was very problematic. Secondly, even if, and we give you another even if here, even if they can still utilize anger on their side, we tell you this is problematic for another three reasons. Number one, because if you're angry, oftentimes you tend to be irrational as well, and how you oftentimes attack the entity and the individual, and less likely the logic and the argumentation coming from the other side. But secondly, we also tell you that gets zero response again, that the language that people use oftentimes becomes more cruel, the language becomes more irrational, and meeting media, even if there's anger and media isn't used to it, will focus on the language and less likely the message behind the movement, the purpose of the discussion in the first place. We also tell you in Dylan's speech, again, that there's a different level in anger, right? Not everyone feels the same level of anger. So when there's a norm, more people are forced to have not authentic discussions. They need to come up with some sort of fake anger and try to meet the norm in the first place. But most importantly, why do we take this debate? Because we grant choice. Our case was never that we would enforce a norm of political civility. Our case was us opposing the norm of political outrage, which means that if movements and discussions want to focus on political civility on our side, they can do this because there's no norm of political outrage. If they want to focus on political outrage, despite the harms we mentioned in Ethan's speech, they can do so. Nobody is stigmatizing them because there isn't that norm that makes political outrage the norm in most discussions. That is why on our side, even if they talk about and play around examples such as like slavery, Korea independence, and things like Japan, we tell you we take this debate clearly because it wasn't our burden to prove why political civility is the norm, but also because the potency of political outrage dissipates when it is chained to the stratus of societal norms. Proud to be on side all positions.
All right, thank you, opposition reply, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome government reply to close the debate. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yup. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, if the motion is this house prefers cats than dogs, the other team should prefer why dogs are better than cats. That is literally what debate is, Judge. The other team can't just blame cats. This is what the debate today looks like, and we tell that this is definitely the burden that they need to prove why their world is much more better, even though they don't have their own world. Because literally, this is about pervert debate. It's about comparing. I don't know where their benefits come from. I don't know why they think we're much more better than them. But if they have a no world and they say, we don't need to have a burden to prove why disability is much more better, I don't get their point. The argument world looks like this is literally gaslighting, right? However, in reality, this isn't working, Judge. We proved you with mechanism. Let's check this one by one. Let's focus on their best case. The main idea was that outrage itself has no logic, right? It's easy for you to not have logic, right? Julia and Bone clearly destroyed this, proving why having no logic is an exclusive thing. Because in the other team, they say having logic in a kind way, and our team is saying having logic in an angry way. Why? Because if there is no logic in the first place, that's just only literally ignored from media, ignored from the people, because that's just what people think, right? We tell the problem is in the status quo, is that even though these kind of minorities or even other people have this logic, because it isn't getting each issue, they're just saying, because of this logic, can you please do this? No one's gonna listen because already they're in a disadvantaged status, right? We tell you outrage is the way they can be issued. And literally, Evie told you that eventually, even though we don't have logic, rage is a much more better thing. Because when in the other team, when they only have logic, they're still not listed as already in the status quo. In our team, if we have at least have rage, we still have the opportunity to show the logic from the future. We at least have the opportunity to make people to listen to minorities. In the status quo, they don't listen. We make people listen, Judge. The next issue is about normalizing. Let's take their best, because we even compared you. Let's take their best and say, okay, this is normalized. There's not much rate, right? We still think our team is better, and we clearly prove you that, because at least, even though it's not those 100% attention that our team says you can achieve all those 100% attention, we at least compared to the other team rule, the minority at least have a voice to talk about it, right? In the other team, they're saying, so eventually, white people, black people still have should live in a much better life. You're like discriminating us, and we're like right now, we need to solve this problem. You are wrong, I am right. We still think that even though this isn't normalized, when minorities actually still be aggressive, because they're already a minority, it's gonna be an issue. And we told you that is the characteristic of media, that is the characteristic of outrage. They also talked about discussions, like there will be no discussion like outraging. We told you discussion isn't even an exclusive thing. You don't fight over your same side, right? Judge, what the world looks like is you fight over the opposition side. We discuss and say, okay, because we discussed all these logic are here, therefore you're bad, you're wrong. In the other team, they have this logic, they have discussion, even though we take their best case and say, also, please, can you do this? And we told you that's not solving, right? And I even don't have their own rules. I don't know what they look like. Also lastly about the message, about talking about like attack personality is cool. We clearly told you from the deputy and which she's saying, why is this itself bad? We need to say something wrong or wrong thing. We can't say something wrong. Okay, I understand, but can you please do this, right? Wrong thing is a wrong thing. We want change. We want a much better thing. Lastly, this is a preferred debate. They don't have their own case, Judge. We clearly put apartheid, Me Too movement, slavery, Korea's independence, so much samples. They have none. What we told you, Judge, is that eventually it's a better rule to at least have one rule. In the other team, they have none. That is today's debate, Judge. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.